Mitt and Minn, Part 6. Well, Min is already in Chicago with the family who picked her up on the bike trail, but they're worried about her. They think she's sick, so they're taking her to the vet. But Mitt, well, he's on the back of a goose or being carried by a goose somehow up to Chicago. The goose's name is Trula. Well, let's see if Mitt and Minn, how well they do in the Windy City. This chapter is titled City Mouse. Min remained quiet in her cage while seated on the lap of the girl's father. They were in the doctor's waiting room now, and Min knew if she was going to escape, she had better do it soon. Min waited for the father to become distracted by a commotion in the waiting room. It was a busy place with 2 parakeets, 1 cat, 3 dogs, and a weasel. Min sized up one of the holes in the cover of her cage and knew that if she pulled herself tight, she could fit right through it and scramble out. She could see that she would need to race all the way through the waiting room and then out the building without being caught. "Mr. Charles," a voice said from behind the desk at the front of the room, "did you fill out your paperwork?" Mr. Charles stepped up to the desk to answer the nurse. Leaving the cage on the waiting room table unattended, now was Min's chance. Min tucked herself as small as she could and squeezed through the hole. She plopped out onto the table and scurried beneath the couch, where she spotted a hole in the wall that took her straight outside. Mr. Charles did not notice her escaping, but the other animals in the waiting room did. They began to make noise at the sight of a mouse running across the floor. But Min couldn't worry about that. She had to keep her mind on one thing: get out the door and into the city. Min was free. Min was free at last. Whir! Whoosh! Cars and buses and trucks were whizzing by, one after the other. They were speeding so fast that Min could hardly catch sight of them. The streets were filled with people and bikes and strollers and market stands. The buildings went upward into the sky farther than Min could see, and it seemed that everything was moving much faster than Min had ever seen. "Hey, you!" a gruff voice said. "Hey, you, with the dumb look on your face." Min turned. 4 rats standing there laughed. "We say dumb, and she looks. How's that for new to the city?" Min did not think they were being very nice. At first, she felt a little afraid, being lost without Mitt to help her. But then her scared feeling turned into an angry feeling when she realized she was being teased in such a mean way. "Mean," one of the rats continued. "This looks like a country mouse." Min began to walk away. She shouldered herself up to the long building that ran the length of the street and kept her nose to the ground, trying to get away from the rats. But even so, they followed. She turned the corner and began to run. The rats began to run too. Before she knew it, Min was racing along the sidewalk as fast as she could, and then whomp! She dropped through an open manhole cover right into a cold, dark hole in the middle of the walkway. When she looked up, she saw the rats peering down at her, and they didn't look friendly. And this is actually one of the pictures from your booklet, okay, that you have. Okay, so that is the story behind that illustration. Chapter 17, The Rats. And this is an illustration of the Chicago skyline. So that's the city, downtown Chicago. Chapter 17, The Rats. Trula landed along the waterfront in downtown Chicago. There were picnic tables with plenty of bread and cracker crumbs below, enough for Trula and Mitt to find a small meal. Lake Michigan was beautiful, but Mitt could tell the city of Chicago was much different than the Mackinac State Forest in Michigan, where he grew up. Thinking about the forest made him think about his parents and how it now was more important than ever to find them and to tell them about Minn. Back at the manhole, the rats peered into the open hole, one by one dropping into the opening where Minn was cowering. 1, 2, 3, and 4. The rats stood right in front of Minn and looked her straight in the eyes. "You must be new in town," the largest one said. "We can help you." At the waterfront, Trula told Mitt it was time for her to leave, as she needed to catch up with the rest of her group and continue her southward journey. Mitt appreciated all that Trula had done for him. Before she left, he looked at the river and told her in the best way that he could that he did understand about the river. "Trula, I will not push it," he said. "I will let it flow on its own." Hearing that, Trula nodded and left Chicago. Mitt was now alone. Once again, he was alone, all alone, and nowhere to go. Back in the manhole, Minn was not quite sure whether to believe the rats or not, and then it happened. In an unsuspecting but genuine way, one of the rats made a gesture with his paw that was known as a motion of kindness. It was a simple thing and done in the way that rats and mice will do. From this, Minn knew that, although they may talk differently than her and may behave a bit differently than her, it didn't mean that they were unkind. So there in the middle of a storm drain with hundreds of people walking overhead, Minn told the rats her story and accepted their help. Mitt, on the other side of town, and believing that Minn was no longer alive, began to race toward the buildings that lined the street. He knew he had to start asking about his parents. Where could they be? Where were they staying? At the same time, across town, the rats urged Minn to follow them to their home. Minn scurried through tunnels and pipelines, across walkways and streets, often narrowly escaping the cars and motorcycles and buses. When they arrived at Navy Pier, it was almost bedtime, and Minn was ready for sleep. The rats brought her into an abandoned garbage pail near the edge of the park area, and, once inside, Minn fell fast asleep. The rats fell fast asleep too, knowing that in the morning they would help Minn find her parents. That night, Mitt found shelter near the entrance of a museum in the heart of the city. There were steps and a stoop in front, and Mitt found a crack right between the third and fourth stairs. It was growing colder at night now that it was early autumn, and Mitt was glad to have found a safe place to rest and stay warm. As he drifted into sleep, his mind played with thoughts of Minn, and the sadness he felt over losing her overcame him. There, in the middle of the big city, with all its noise and hustle and bustle, Mitt wept small, mouse-like tears, quietly and to himself, until he fell asleep. On the other side of the city, thinking that Mitt was gone for good, Minn did the same. In the darkness of the garbage pail, surrounded by creatures she did not know, but had no choice but to trust. Chapter 18, Navy Pier. In the morning, the rats woke Minn and offered her donut crumbs and orange peels for breakfast. Minn was hungry enough to eat every last bite, but did not want to seem greedy to her new friends. While eating, Minn asked, "Where do you think my parents might be? Can you help me now? Have you met 2 white-footed mice recently?" The rats had an idea. "So this is how it will go," said the largest of the rats. "We will leave and make our way to the streets near the Sears Tower. We have friends there, other rats like us, and we will ask them if they have seen any white-footed mice. We will tell them that if they have, they must tell us." Then the big one looked at Min, his face serious. "You must not leave our home, as there is much danger out there. We know the city." With that, Min looked at the two rats who were assigned to remain in the pail with her. They nodded and let her know, in the hard but well-intended way that rats will do, that they would make certain that she was safe, at least for a while. Chapter 19. Marnie. That morning, Mitt went nose first out of the crack, trying to avoid being seen. He jumped into a nearby bush and began to kick up the dirt, looking for seed and crumbs. He found the city a nice place to be. It seemed most people were in such a hurry that they didn't know a mouse wandering about. There was much food and plenty of places to find water. Right then, a crowd of people came up to the door of the museum. It seemed as if they were waiting for the door to open, but they were blocking the entrance to his hideaway. All of a sudden, Mitt noticed an osprey circling above. The bush offered little cover, and the people were still blocking his entrance into the hole. Right then, as the bird began to swoop down upon Mitt, the crowd began to file through the open door into the museum. Mitt had only one way to avoid the large bird, and that was to move with the crowd of people. Meanwhile, at Navy Pier, Min was growing restless. After such a large feast, the two rats fell asleep, and Min, thinking that perhaps she should begin to look for her parents, left the garbage pail and scurried right into the park. There were crowds everywhere, and more food that she had ever seen before. It was not the same sort of food that she found in the forest, or the same type of food that Gertie made especially for her, but it was food all the same. There were leftover hot dog buns, scattered potato chips, sweet sticks of half-eaten caramel apples, and her favorite sticky pieces of crisp bread with sugar on top. Min didn't have to work too hard to stay out of sight either, as most people didn't seem to notice her, and there were plenty of places to hide. Then Min noticed something she had not seen before. To her left was a male red-winged blackbird, flitting back and forth in a nervous manner. Min knew, much in the way that mice know some things, that this sort of bird was no danger to her. But what followed the red-winged blackbird was most certainly a danger, and now it was coming for Min. Min tried to dart away from the red-billed gull as it swooped on her, but too late. Before she knew it, the gull had her firmly in its grasp and was heading skyward over the Navy Pier. The gull was Marnie, and she quickly began swerving around food stands and above the carousel until the three red-winged blackbirds began to chase them. Min squirmed in the gull's bill, but Marnie had no intention of dropping the mouse. And the blackbirds, who had been angered by how close Marnie had been to the territory near the Ferris wheel, was not about to stop either. Both ways, it was no good for Min. And then here is a picture of, and this is also in your booklet, this is a picture of Navy Pier, which is a popular tourist attraction in downtown Chicago. So next time we're going to find out. They're both in the city, aren't they? They both seem to be running into some city-like types of things, some trouble there. So we'll see. Do they finally meet each other? Do they finally get to their parents? Stay tuned. Bye-bye.